Okay, now we're recording and we're live, and I want to welcome everyone here tonight to our continuation of the history of Israel. And I hope you're staying warm. If you're in Texas, it is very, very, very cold tonight for us anyway. It's in the 20s, and for us down here, that's just a disaster. And on top of that, it's raining and or snowing or sleeting, and so that's also a disaster for those of us in the South. But that's what it is. And so we're nice and toasty inside. We're blessed with that. So let's go ahead and begin with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lasoch b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commandments and commands us to engross ourselves in words of Torah. All right, so here we are. We're going to talk about, we're taking kind of a parenthetical right now because we've been talking about the kings. Now, tonight we're not going to be talking about any kings, but we're going to be talking about prophets who were so important to the time frame, of the kings and their reigns. And we're going to be talking about the end of Elijah's prophecy period and the beginning of Elisha. And here we are in Second Kings, and we're going to jump back to chapter. We're going to jump back to chapter 2, and then next week, then we will pick up and go to chapter 4, and we'll start working 4 through 7 because that's working. That's talking about the ministry of Elisha and what he did. And so uh, that's where we are on Second Kings, and then we're Second Chronicles just doesn't have anything about the prophets here in the regard to their ministry and their miracles and so forth. Only in their interaction with the various kings. And here we are with the just our my map, the obligatory map. We're still in this time frame right here, where Elisha it begins and Elijah ends right in this time frame over here. And so then, like I said, when we get back onto this, we will have gone through 3 or 4 more kings of Israel and Judah. So this chapter that this and on through Kings, the 10th chapter, they compose what has been referred to as, I guess it would be, the Elisha cycle, and it doesn't occur in its proper chronological sequence. Okay, it is not in sequence, um, and so we base that on the fact that in Second Chronicles 21 it mentions the writing of Elijah, which came to Jehoram the king of Judah in the 5th year of his reign. Well, um, it's significant that the Hebrew word for letter doesn't appear in this passage. It's just that such a writing may well have been written by Elijah, just something that he wrote down, gave it to Elijah to deliver to Jehoram at the proper time. We don't know. Furthermore, the 5th year of Jehoram may very well have referred to the 5th year of his co-regency with his father. So then that would still have some overlap with Elijah. At any rate, it's a little problematic with the death of Elijah and this letter to Jehoram. So we don't know exactly how that works, and so we just have to say this thing is not in chronological order, but that it's there to kind of tell a story. And so here we are. We're just that's just kind of a what would you call, just a side comment, so that you're not trying to put all these things in sequence, chronological sequence, because it doesn't work when you try to do that. All right, so the prophets are Elijah and Elisha, a little bit out of order in the way that they're told. So, All right, let's go ahead with the first section of scripture here. Now it came to pass when Adonai was about to take up Elijah by a whirlwind into heaven that Elijah went with Elisha from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, please, for Adonai has sent me on to Bethel." But Elisha said, "As Adonai lives and as you live, I will not leave you." And so they went on down to Bethel. Then the sons of the prophets at Bethel came out to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that Adonai is going to take your master away from over you today?" And he says, "Yes, I know. Be silent. Shut up. I don't want to hear it." So I added that part in the back in the end of it. So it appears that um, okay, and here's a map. Okay, so they were up here in Gilgal. Now this is not the same Gilgal that's over here in right on the Jordan River. It was a different Gilgal, and so they were up there at that Gilgal, and so it looks like that the the taking of Elijah in this whirlwind, that it was evidently there was some kind of a prophecy that's not in the Bible that talked about this. Um, and so, we can only assume that since the school of the prophets or the sons of the prophets there in Bethel and also in Jericho knew about this, they talked to Elisha and says, "Hey, isn't today the day that God is going to take Elijah up in a whirlwind?" And he said, "Yes, it is. I don't want," he says, "I know, be quiet. I don't want to talk about it." So Elijah then he told Elisha, he says, "Look, I want you to just stay here at Gilgal, and I'm going to go on down to Bethel because God has wanted me to go down there. Why? Perhaps so that he could talk to the sons of the prophets there and do a farewell thing um, so and again the deal about taking the master away today might be a little bit of a stretch for them to say today, because if he's going from Bethel to, I mean, a Gilgal down to Bethel, I think it's 17 miles. Okay, well, 17 miles, that's a pretty good hike if you're really stepping it. And um and so then to go from there, and then they're still got to go, as the story goes on, they still have to go on down to Jericho, and that's even further. That's, if I remember, that's over 20 to 25 miles down to Jericho. And so they're saying today, and I think what they were meaning is that, it's time, that he's about this time God's going to take him away into a whirlwind. But they knew about it. They knew that God was going to take him in a whirlwind. So but Elisha was just not, he wasn't didn't want to deal with it. He said, just, I don't want to talk about it. And so they went ahead and went on. Let's go ahead with the other verses here. Then Elijah said to him, "Elisha, stay here, please, for Adonai has sent me on to Jericho." But he said, "As Adonai lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So they came to Jericho. Then the sons of the prophets at Jericho approached Elisha and said, "Do you know that Adonai is going to take away your master from over you today?" He said, "Yes, I know. Be silent." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, please, for Adonai has sent me on to Jordan, onto the Jordan." And he said, "But as Adonai lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So both of them went on. So um, Elijah's motive in making this request, the three times there, is not really clear. Maybe he thought that the scene of taking up in a whirlwind was going to be too much, or whatever. I don't know. We don't really know what his motivation was. Perhaps it was a test to see how much Elisha was willing to stay with him, and and it could have been maybe even that Elijah thought that maybe this should have been just kept quiet. But all the schools of the prophets knew about it. So how could that mean that it was quiet? And so we really don't know what was in Elijah's mind on this, and but it's kind of like the test three times. Like Yeshua said to Peter, Peter, do you love me? And he said it three times, and so each time Elisha said, I'm not going anywhere but with you. I'm staying with you. And so he repeated this, as the Lord liveth and if you live, this kind of a double oath thing. He repeated it three times. And it's just remarkable that it would be done. We see this double oath again in places like Judges 8:19 and Ruth 3:13, and there's other places that people have used a double oath, but it's relatively rare that they were united. I mean, people would use a double oath, but not three times like Elisha did. He used that double oath three times, so that's very unusual. So but again, he just doesn't want to talk about this. He's reluctant to live up to grant that something is going to happen to his mentor. So they go on. Then they get down to um, if we go to 7 verses 7. Then 50 of the sons of the prophets went and stood aside at a distance from them, while the two of them stood by the Jordan. Elijah then took his mantle, wrapped it together, and struck the waters, and they divided here and there. So the two of them crossed over on dry land. Now, um, we can kind of see how large these prophetic schools were, that at least they had 50 students there in Jericho. So we don't know how big Bethel was, but to have 50 of these prophets with their families and so forth. So that was pretty good sized school. And so they went up to the heights right there at Jericho. There's a geograph or geological um, phenomenon, I guess you'd say, just that there's a mountain, kind of a plateaued mountain right behind Jericho. And from getting up there on that, you can look down onto the Jordan Valley right there, and it gets a real good view. Now, I think that may be speculation from somebody's point of view that they went up there on that, because that would have really put it a long way down if they were going to be looking at um, Elijah and Elisha down there. So I don't know. I think that they may have followed them for a while, but then they just stood back when they got down to the Jordan. And um, Elijah took his mantle. Now, what was his mantle? A lot of people think, well, that's just his royal robe, or his robe of office, some purple thing that wrapped around him and was all nice and elegant. But it probably wasn't. It was probably some kind of a goat skin wrap of some kind of a thing. It was an animal skin, and because it is described, being hairy, and that Elijah was a hairy guy too, and that so if it was a goat skin, it could have been such that once that it was kind of his oath of office, or his symbol of office, and that they described it as being wrapped around him, kind of like as a girdle, and in other descriptions. So we don't really know exactly what it was, but just for the sake of argument here, that it could have been a kind of a goat skin wrap, and as such, it could have been kind of stiff if it was all rolled up. Taken, because if you take a cloth mantle and or cloth, any kind of a cloth robe or something, and you roll it up, it's just going to go, oh, it's not going to be, it's going to be floppy. It's not going to be stiff. And so he says he wrapped this thing up and then struck the water with it. Kind of, who did that? Well, that sounds more out of the playbook of Moses, where he would strike things and water would come up, or strike things and water would the sea would part, or whatever. And so in verse 9, this is now as they were crossing over, Elijah said to Elisha, "Ask what I will do for you before I am taken from you." So Elisha said, "Please let a double portion of your spirit be on me." And he replied, "You have asked a hard thing. Nevertheless, if you see me when I'm taken from you, it will be so to you. But if not, it will not be so." And as they were walking along and talking, behold, a chariot of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them. And Elijah went up in a whirlwind into heaven. Now, um, after this series of tests, I guess these three tests, Elijah asked, Elisha, "What would you like to have?" Now, this double portion uh, that he talked about, he said, now this is in reference to the law in Deuteronomy um, 21:17, talking about the laws of inheritance, and um, so it says, and this in 21:17 says, "And he shall acknowledge the firstborn by giving him a double portion of all that he hath. The right of the firstborn as his is his." Elisha considered himself then to be the only child, or the firstborn of Elijah, and as the disciples of eminent teachers were also called children. That was, they were just the children of so and so. So that here he claims a double portion of Elijah's spiritual influence, and any other disciples coming in, well, they would get a single share only. So, if they got just a single share of what Elijah had, boy, they would still be powerful prophets. But Elisha said, "No, I want the part from the uh, the aspect of being your only son, the firstborn son at least, and I want this double portion of what you have." So the um, sons of the prophets, that really means no more than the disciples or scholars of the prophets. Today we would call them Talmudim, and or students. Now, the original words that he used in this double portion is Pishanaim, and that really does mean the two parts, or the double portion, and rather than a quantity. All right, so he's not saying I want twice the spirit that you've got. He said I want a double portion of what you have, and because you know Elijah probably blessed all the other prophets, and blessed them with some kind of spirit of the Lord too. So there may have been 100 parts there. So um, Elisha is just saying, well, whatever the parts are, I want a double portion, because I consider myself your principal son, your firstborn son. So that's that's kind of, that puts that in a little bit different perspective. Any comments or questions so far on that? Okay. Ed, you unmuted yourself. Did you have comment, or you just muted
I'm
yourself
good.
back? Okay. All right.
Thank
Now,
you.
it's Elijah is ending his ministry, or his ministry is being ended for him. And it's kind of interesting if you look back on the ministry of Moses and on Elijah. There are quite a few similarities, I guess you'd say. Okay, they both of them stood alone for righteousness, and they were both associated with fire on the mountains. And Moses and Sinai, Elijah at Carmel. They were associated with the desert. Moses was out there for 40 years in Midian, and then another 40 years with the Israelites. And Elijah, of course, was over in he ran from Jezebel, so he went down into the wilderness, went back over to Arabia, to Sinai, where he stayed for a while. They both of them met God at Sinai, and so they were chased out of their country by pagan rulers, and then they knew God's miraculous provision for food and water. That both of them had been provided for by just miracles of food and water, and they both of them wandered in the desert for a period measured by 40. Okay. Um, Moses in Midian for 40 years, then in the wilderness for 40 years. And Elijah was in the desert, and he fasted for 40 days. And so that 40 was a similarity. And they're both of them were powerful examples of praying men. And they both parted waters, one the Red Sea, the other the Jordan, and they had very close associates who succeeded them. Moses had Joshua, and Elijah had Elisha, and both of their successors also parted water. Joshua, when he got to the Jordan River, he parted there. God parted the water when Joshua did what he told him to, and with when the ark, the priest stepped into the water with the ark, the waters parted. And then now you see Elijah, who parted the waters with his mantle. And then both of them, Moses and Elijah, had mysterious or strange deaths. Moses, God says, okay, I'm going to take you up here on Mount Nebo, and you're not going to come back. And I personally am going to bury you so no one will ever find you. And so, all the archaeologists in the world can look around all over Mount Nebo until the cows come home, and they'll never find the grave of Moses, because God said, I'm going to hide you so no one will ever find you again. And then, of course, with Elijah, he was carried up into the whirlwind. All right. So now, there's also something that I wanted to show you. These are representations of Elijah going up in a chariot, in the fiery chariot. And this one here is an old tin type thing, and then this one over here is a more modern representation of it. And the problem with that is, the Bible doesn't say that he was taken up by this fiery chariot. If you look back at the words in the Bible, it says they were coming along there talking, and behold, a chariot of fire and horses. It was miraculous. I'll admit that was a miraculous thing. A chariot of fire and horses separated the two of them. So it went right smack dab between the two of them, and they separated them. So Elisha was no longer standing right next to Elijah. And at that time, then a whirlwind came, picked up Elijah, and carried him off into heaven. And so the thing about it is, in our imagination and looking at the wording, we have over the years brought it to mean that Elijah was carried off in a chariot of fire, whereas when the Bible says all the chariots of fire and the horses did was separate Elijah from Elisha. And, just it's kind of a strange deal. And so here's a couple of pictures that I found. Not very many people have really looked at this and associated how Elijah really did go up. And so here's a picture that depicts Elijah going up in in a whirlwind or in a storm, and of course his mantle falls down. And then in some children's book, they pretty much got it right here too, that Elijah was carried off in a whirlwind, a tornado, and then the horses were down here, separate from that. And so it's uh, just kind of interesting. I would be interested to know how many of you that are here tonight look at this and you say, I always thought that he was carried away in a chariot of fire. The that was always the image that I thought. Okay, I'm one of those. I always thought that he was carried off in the chariot of fire. It didn't it didn't register on me that he was carried away in a whirlwind and not this chariot of fire. The Bible is very specific there. Does I, I don't know. Just curious. Anybody else thought differently? Did you know that he was carried off in a whirlwind rather than in the fiery chariot? Does anybody unmute yourself and tell me? No, I knew better. I knew that. You know. So okay, doesn't look like anybody is going to bite on that one. So we were all in the same boat. We were taught that he went up in this whirlwind. All right. So I mean in the fiery chariot rather than in the whirlwind. Okay. So going ahead. Yeah. Any comments and questions though beyond that right now? Okay. So we already talked about that, our perception of what it was, and then the actual thing that did happen. Carl.
Well, I just want to reiterate the fact that I still got my hat off to Elisha because he's the one that seems to be getting these schools of prophets, you know. It seems to me, from what I gather, is after the encounter with Jezebel and Elijah ran away and God tried to revive him, and he just never, it was downhill after that ever since. So about the best he could do was appoint his successor and be with him. But this Elisha must have been quite a sharp character to get schools of prophets in several different locations and get this thing going. And after he's gone, these guys are going to be around a while and have quite an influence on the nation of Israel for quite some time.
Okay. Now where it's a good comment. Where are you getting the fact that it was Elisha that started the school of the prophets rather than I don't know what, or if they were some organic thing that had been around for a long time? I don't know. I'm just asking the question.
Well, this is the when we see them, you have your whole list of prophets going down the line, and the first time you see anything mentioned about a seminary or school of prophets is when Elisha takes is involved. He's like understudy to Elijah, but
Mhm.
Elijah sure didn't do it.
Well, I don't know. That's what I'm saying is how do we know where these things came from? That whether they came from Elisha, I'm not arguing for the sake of arguing, but I just don't know of the origin of the schools of the
Yeah.
prophets at all. And I don't know. I'm reluctant to say that it was Elisha that started them rather than Elijah or even someone before Elijah, because there were prophets before Elijah, and perhaps there were some kind of schools, that stem from the priesthood that taught these people that you know, how to prophesy or what, because there were even, well, let's think of this. There were even schools of the prophets back in the days of Saul, because remember when he went out there and started prophesying naked, they said, "What is this? Saul has joined the school of the prophets." So there was something even back 500 years, 400 years before Elijah and Elisha. So there was
Yeah, but I'm
something
pretty
there.
pretty sure that had to have died out when Saul killed so many priests. I mean, the spirituality of that place and the tabernacle and all of that was so spiritually dead during that time that. And what another thing, a piece of this is this is the northern kingdom. Otherwise, I would say that maybe Jehoshaphat was taking the Torah to numerous cities in that, but that was in Judah. So this is in Israel, and they've got this thing going pretty good. They got a pretty good group of
Yeah.
schools going at this particular time, and so I got my hat off to them.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's fine. It doesn't really matter, I guess. It just we don't know the origin of the schools of the prophets. There were, though, schools of the prophets for hundreds of years prior to that, both in what would now be Israel, and then in Judah. So don't know where they came from, but just to suffice it to say they were there, and they were looked like they were thriving. There was enough people there, quite a few people there. So, all right, let's go ahead and if there's no other comments on that, all right, so we'll go ahead and so as Elisha was watching, he cried out, "Avi, Avi, the chariot, or father, father, the chariot of Israel and its horsemen." Then he saw him no more. So he took hold of his own clothes and tore them in two pieces. Then he picked up the mantle of Elijah and that fell from him. When he returned and stood by the bank of the Jordan, he took the mantle of Elijah that had fallen off him, struck the waters, said, "Where is Adonai, the God of Elijah?" And as he indeed struck the waters, they parted here, then, and there, meaning that they just went to one side and the other. It parted, and he crossed over. So, um, now this has been variously described both in a couple of ways. That when he's saying Avi, Avi, or Father, Father, the chariot of Israel and its horsemen, that he was recognizing that the power and authority of Elijah came from no other than God. It wasn't Elijah himself, it was from God. And then there are other uh, people, that this other interpretations of this would be that Elisha recognized the real true value to Israel that Elijah was, that his power through God and his ministry of keeping Israel was much more. Um, it was stronger than all of Israel's horses and chariots and army and everything. That it would have been um, the prayer and the ministry of Elijah was much more important and more powerful than that. And so it is kind of a strange saying, and it's difficult to really understand. And I read, I don't know, quite a few, several tens or so different um, Bible scholars on this that talked about it, and all of them kind of had a little bit different take on it. But it kind of settled down into two things. That one, Elisha was recognizing that God was the true power, and then the corollary to that, that he was recognizing that as God was the true power through Elijah, that Elijah's ministry was much more powerful than anything that um, that the army could have done. So, um, so as Elijah then reached down, he picked up the mantle, and so there again, he had seen Elijah go up, and Elijah had told him, he says, "If you see me, if you actually witness this, and you see that, then." Um, the double portion is yours. And basically, he was saying, I can't give it to you, but if God allows you to see this, then it'll be yours. And so he got the mantle, and he went over to got back to the Jordan, and he used the mantle in the same way that Elijah had. Now, it's kind of interesting in that um, the the way that this is written, it's kind of disjointed, and the Vulgate Bible, they have a kind of a different take on it. They said that Elisha went over to the river Jordan and he struck the water with it, with the mantle, and nothing happened. And that's when he said, "Where is Adonai, the God of Elijah?" And then he struck it again, and then the waters parted, because he was recognized that it was God and not the mantle, and not God and not Elijah or something like that. That was the take of the Vulgate Bible and their translation of it. It's a little bit inconclusive because of the way that you read. If you read the Hebrew, it was more of a simultaneous thing that, okay, he's going up there and acknowledging that it's God, and basically he's saying that okay, this is, where's the God, or okay, God, you're there, here we go. And he struck the water with the mantle, and of course it parted. So either way, I'm not sure that it's that important, but that was a couple of all of the other. I think that's the only other translation that actually says that is the Vulgate translation. All the other ones just saying they went up there and he struck it, and he's saying it. Okay, where's the God of Elijah? And the waters parted right then. He didn't strike it um, and then he did it and failed, and so, he said, well, okay, now where is this God of Elijah? And then he struck it again, and the waters parted. There are a couple of guys that think, that talked like that, but it's kind of the minority. So I don't know, to tell you the truth, how that actually played out and how it did it. It's inconclusive in the Hebrew anyway. So um, any comments on that? All right, so going on, when the sons of the prophets of Jericho saw him some way off, they said the spirit of Elijah had rested on Elisha. So they came to meet him and bowed down on the ground to the ground before him. Then they said to him, "Behold, now there are 50 men, strong men, with your servants. Please let them go and search for your master. Perhaps the Ruach Adonai, the Spirit of God, has taken him up and cast him onto some mountains or some valley." And but he said, "Don't send them." But when they urged him until he was ashamed, uh, he said, "Send them." So they sent 50 men. Though they searched for 3 days, they did not find him. When they came back to him while he was staying in Jericho, he said to them, "Hey, didn't I tell you not to go?" It's a big "I told you so" is what happened there. Um, and one of the translation where it says that it urged him until he was ashamed. There's a little bit more. Another kind of a translation of it would be that instead of ashamed, and just that he was just out of kindness, he said, "Okay, I know that you thought highly of Elijah, and this is hard for you, and you feel like that this would be good. So go ahead and search." And so the guy that was commenting on that said, "We see a different kind of a person in Elisha than Elijah, more of a kinder, gentler prophet in some ways, because Elijah was a fiery prophet. He was full of fire, and that's what he called down fire. And Elisha was a little bit different, and so we don't see this. It's kind of interesting in Jewish circles. They say, well, the Messiah will not come until Elijah comes first. Elijah, the fiery, fire and brimstone kind of guy. Well, who is that? John the Baptist. That was his style of preaching, and so then that ushered in the Messiah. So just kind of an interesting parallel there. That if you look at it that way. So they looked at this guy and they said he has the power of Elijah. Well, how did they know that? Well, because they're watching, and he struck the water and it parted and he walked across. That was a big indicator right there that okay, yeah, this guy's got it. If he can part the water just like Elijah did, then he must have it. So then the men of the city said to Elisha, "Look now, if they see this, he's got the power and so forth." They said, "Look now, the situation of this city is pleasant, as my Lord sees. It's a good place. We like it, but the water is bad and the land barren." He responded, "Bring me a new jar and put salt in it." So they brought it to him, and then he went out to the spring of water, threw salt in it, and said, "Thus says Adonai, I have healed this water. No longer will there be from there death or barrenness." So the waters were healed to this day, according to the word that Elisha spoke. All right, now this this water evidently had made people sick, and I don't know, the physical condition of the town was actually a kind of a metaphor, symbolic of the spiritual condition of all of Israel. And so um, the refreshment and fertility of this water had, of everything, had suffered as a result of apostasy. Really wasn't the water so much as that was a kind of a metaphor for it, I guess you'd say. But Elisha was now a new vessel in God's hands, similar to the new jar that he requested. And then he does something even stranger. He puts salt in the jar. Now, you would think that if you put salt, that would be the last thing that you would put in brackish water or bad water to make it pure. But just as maybe a return to God must have appeared to be a backward step to many of these idolatrous Israelites. But nevertheless, since salt is what God ordered, it was effective. The use of salt may have also symbolized a break from the past. That since it is what rubbing certain sacrifices with salt to sanctify them. That's you'll find that in Leviticus, Numbers, and Ezekiel. That's one of the things that they did. They would rub salt on a sacrifice, and so this shows that Adonai, God of Israel, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and not Baal, could restore blessing and fertility to his people. And so this miracle was um, just another polemic against Baal worship, another in your face kind of thing against the worship of Baal, and the Baal's worshipers credited him with ruling over the waters on and beneath the earth. I mean, that was Baal's big shtick, was he ruled the waters, and that included all of the underground springs and the fountains and all that. So by God permanently healing that spring, it would serve as a continuous reminder to these people of God's ability to bring fruitfulness and blessing out of the dead sterility of idolatry. And thank you, Dr. Tom Constable, for that insight into that. So, um, any comments or questions? Okay, finishing off here. From there, he went up to Bethel. As he was going up along the road, some young boys came out of the city. They mocked him, saying to him, "Go on up, Baldy, go on up, Baldy." And so he turned around, looked at them, and cursed them in the name of Adonai. Then two she bears came out of the woods, mauled 42 of the boys. From there, he went up to Mount Carmel, and from there, then he returned back to Samaria. Now, that sounds pretty nasty, pretty harsh, if you ask me, for the kinder and gentler prophet. But you got to put it in context here. Bethel, some mighty things of God happened at Bethel. That was where God spoke to Abraham, and he spoke to Jacob, but Jacob's ladder. I mean, just all of that sort of stuff. But now it had become a center of idolatry in Israel. It was one of the golden calf sites that you find in 2 Kings 2:23. And evidently then Elisha's approach, it triggered a mass demonstration, I guess you'd say, against him by many of the young men. Now, the Hebrew word for this, na'ar, is translated lads in Second Kings 23, describes young men, not boys. I mean, so it's the idea that, okay, these are not little 10 or 12-year-old boys. This would be more like teens or older men. And if there were 42 of them there, then that could be kind of, and they were all jostling around and messing with Elisha. Then that could be kind of one of those deals that it would have been a danger to Elisha. And so there again, though, and then this talking to him, calling him baldy, a bald man. Well, that would be a term of disrespect. And here Elisha was a younger man. He was not an old man, but he was just prematurely bald, male pattern baldness, we call it nowadays. So and the idolaters challenged him to go up to heaven, maybe just like Elijah had done. Go on up, follow Elijah, and so that's the kind of the interpretation of Dr. Walter Kaiser when he's talking about some of the hard sayings of the Old Testament. And it's kind of an interesting view of it. I know Dr. Kaiser, and he was a teacher in one of my yeshiva courses, and so great guy. These youths were typical, though, of a nation that mocked the measure of the messengers of God. They despised His word. They scoffed at His prophets, and not. It wasn't motivated by personal pride so much, but a desire for God's glory, that Elisha pronounced God's curse on them for their disrespect of His prophet and himself. So they were mocking not only Elisha, but they were mocking God, and they were mocking the office of the prophet, of a prophet. And so God had used wild animals to judge rebels before, and so in this case, wild bears, which were still common in ancient Israel. In fact, somebody talked about, one of the things said, there were still bears up into the medieval period of Israel. And so these bears came down, and this kind of shows you, though, that, and here's my, me and maps. Okay, here's where he had come down from the whirlwind to Jericho, healed the waters at Jericho. Then here he is with the bears and the boys. And so it also says that they were mauled. They were not killed. The bears came in, but for the two bears to go in there and harm or injure 42 guys at one time, that must have been a big gaggle of people that were surrounding Elisha and mocking him. And it just, again, my upbringing, being taught about Elisha and all that, was that these there were 5 or 6 little guys of 6 or 7 years old, to go around calling him Baldy, Baldy. and so he had some bears come out there um, and eat the boys up. Well, no, that's not what it was. They were older guys, and they were against. Uh, they were actually, against God. They were very disrespectful, and so God sent the bears down and just uh, gave them a little bit of a whipping, as I guess you could say, and didn't kill them. None of the guys were killed. It just said they were mauled, and generally when something like that, the Bible would say, yeah, this person was killed and their body was thrown over here or whatever. These guys were just kind of beat up, scratched, bit, whatever, but they were not killed. So um, these two miracles that Elisha did, the healing of the water in Jericho, and then this, uh, you know, the bear incident, would be kind of set the tone for his whole ministry, that he would be a blessing to the needy, but he would also be a source of judgment for those who did not respect Adonai. And so, with that, that's the end of our lesson tonight. And